Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick, and today we are going to be continuing our Shipmaking 101 videos with So You Want to Make a Cruiser. Now, this has probably been the most difficult BFG philosophy video that I've ever made because I've had to go into a great deal of thought about what it actually means to make a cruiser-class vessel, especially if you're trying to construct something new for a fan-made fleet that you're trying to make. First things first, recognize that cruisers are the core of the game. They may be the baseline capital ship, they may be your run-of-the-mill guardsman equivalent, but they are, simply put, the cornerstone of all of Battlefleet Gothic. The game was balanced off of the cruiser, not any other form of ship. Everything else spawned from the cruiser, so trying to make your own can be rather complicated. Now, we have to go fleet by fleet. This is going to be a long video. For that, I apologize, but this is not a simple topic. Now, all of Battlefleet Gothic basically started with the humble lunar, and everything just kind of spread out from there. Now, when it comes to the Imperium of Man, the standardized cruiser comes with very specific architecture. And this actually leads into another question that one of my audience members gave me, which is, why is it that the Imperium of Man in a cruiser slot does not have a prow-based weapon battery or lance? And the answer is, one, principally game balance. The Imperial Navy was designed to have one of two things in the prow, a Nova Cannon or a torpedo salvo, effectively a specialized weapon. Now, there are older ships that were in development that never really made it into the main game, specifically the Demon Slayer, though if I remember, I'm not sure, I think Demon Slayer was a BFG magazine, but I may be wrong, but effectively the prow section is for special weapons of some variety. Now, when you move out of the standard Imperial Navy and into things like Inquisition or Space Marine or other really esoteric character ships, or up in scale into the battleships or down in scale into the light cruisers, this changes. Obviously, battleships can have prow weapons batteries. Obviously, light cruisers can have prow lances and weapons batteries, or torpedoes as well, if you in the case of the Dauntless and the Endeavors, but to a lesser extent. But the standardized cruiser, as part of the literal fleet meta of the Imperial Navy, you get your two choices. You have your Nova Cannon and you have your torpedo. Now, if you're going to make a unique fleet, which if you go and look at Book of the Void 2, you actually see an alternative to the Nova Cannon, which is the Fire Drake Cannon, which I highly recommend you go and have a look at. It's a fun alternative, but for the most part, the purpose of an Imperial cruiser is to have a medium to short, broadly speaking, powerful broadside, but not super powerful, and on top of it, a particularly effective and high damage potential prow weapon as some form of special weapon. So let us have a look at the cream of the crop, the quintessential lunar cruiser. What do we see here? We of course have the prow weapon slots, which are torpedoes, of course. Let me scroll this down just a hair. You have our prow torpedoes. You have the two bays on each side. Now, this is a case of Imperial Navy is always symmetrical. If it's on one side, it's on the other side. There's no asymmetry in this fleet. Now, I have never seen anyone try to make an asymmetrical ship. I would think that that would be a really interesting fleet. If you wanted to pull it Imperial Navy, you'd have to have a really good explanation as to why one side doesn't have the same equipment as the other. But an asymmetrical fleet could actually be pretty cool. Maybe an interesting Xenos race. Maybe a particularly low on resource Imperial Navy sector where they basically have to cram in what they've got. Excuse me. That breaking of symmetry could be a fascinating fleet, but you would create an entirely separate meta and expose yourself to a lot more weaknesses, but also potentially some really curious advantages. Regardless, you have a bay in front, a bay in back, you have the prow bay, and if you want to kind of move into the domain of battlecruiser, you of course have the dorsal. So This is the greatest problem with making a new Imperial Navy ship. There really isn't an option left for you to make. All of the combinations have already been done. Do you want double lances? Great, you have the Gothic. Do you want double battery? Awesome, you have the Tyrant and the Dominator. Do you want a hybrid battery carrier? Well, congratulations, you have the Dictator. If you want, weapons, battery, and lances, you have the Lunar. The only thing that really hasn't been made is the double carrier, and we kind of do have that in the case of the Jovian, even if it's technically a battle cruiser. But even then, to make such a ship is in violation of the convention and lore of the Imperial Navy, because the big carrier lobby, so to speak, lost the political argument. And that's part of the lore. And now, even if big guns never tire, it really is exemplified with Battlefleet Baka. The truth of it is, the only real fleet carrier, quote unquote, is the Emperor. And the Imperial Navy as a whole is far more focused towards having really big guns and torpedoes over launch capacity, even if it has some of the best carriers in the game. But your battle cruiser carrier option, the Mars, it's kind of mediocre in regards for being a carrier. Its whole purpose as a long-range support and artillery carrier is very effective, but as a carrier just by itself, it's no better than a Dictator. And there is no other option. Even the Dominion only has launch capacity 4. There is no Styx equivalent unless you count the Jovian, which none of us should, because we're good and decent human beings. Now, when you are making a new cruiser, you have to recognize that there's very little that you can make here that is not stepping on the toes of another ship. Well, I want a more powerful battery cruiser. Okay, well, are you making it better than the Tyrant or the Overlord or the Dominator? Why are you making it? Why is it necessary? What purpose does it have that these other ships cannot serve? And that's a really hard question. Now, if you do make something and you say you give it some kind of unique set of special rules, maybe it has a strength 13 weapons battery, just a little bit better than the Dominator. Okay, well, what are you going to do to make up for that? Why does it have a stronger capacity? Where is it going to be weaker? Are you going to make it more expensive? What are you going to do to balance this ship out? Because creating a ship that steps on the toes of another ship is almost inevitable within the baseline cruiser slot for the Imperial Navy. And you'll see, as we move into Chaos, we're going to have the same exact problem. Everything has already kind of been done. So we have to ask, at least for the Imperial Navy, is there anything else that we really, realistically can do? And the answer is, kind of. You have to kind of take everything about the Imperial Navy and turn it on its head. You have to have a gimmick that completely changes everything. Now, I'm not going to spoil too much, but Book of the Void 3 plays with this idea a great deal. Also, another fan project that I'm helping somebody out goes over an entire sector that doesn't have normal torpedoes. It has only boarding torpedoes, which gives it an entirely new set of class of ships that work very, very differently than your standard Imperial Navy. Another one works with the idea of fast battleships and fast battle cruisers. So your ships are more fragile, but they're significantly faster. So play around with gimmicks that alter the whole of the ship. Are they more fragile? Are they more durable? Are they slower? Are they faster? Play with these rules and adjust your weapons as needed. So maybe your ship has 6-up armored sides and prow, but not rear, but 1 less shield. How would that affect the firepower? Well, presumably because the ship doesn't have the power demand for a second shield, it may have greater firepower strength, but it also may be slower. These are things that you should really kind of delve into. Now, if you very much want an Imperial ship, an Imperial fleet that has weapons or lances in the prow in the cruiser and battle cruiser slot, there are a couple of modifications in accordance with the conventions of the game that you will have to undertake. One of them is you can't have torpedoes or nova cannons, and nobody can have them, because ultimately what you're going to find if you have a Imperial Navy ship with a weapon battery prow option, you're either going to make it strong enough that there's no point in taking the torpedo or the nova cannon, or there's going to be no point in taking it because the torpedo or nova cannon is so much better. So you're isolating out the alternative. The player is forced to use this. Okay? And you'll see when I release Book of the Void 3, which will be soon, I am compiling it into this document, I do exactly that with the Penumbral Pirates. Everyone wants so desperately to play with Chaos-like cruisers. Well, the thing that they're conflicting with, which is the Chaos Standard and Heavy Cruiser, no longer exist. You get what you ask for, but there's a consequence, and you have to play that game when it comes to Imperial cruisers. Now, can we presume that there's another kind of cruiser out there? I talked a lot with other people about half bays, and I cannot stress this enough. There is no such thing as half bays for the Imperial Navy. The Imperial Navy is a stodgy, orthodox, and completely unwilling to behave and be creative, ultimately, fleet. There's no room for it. Everything here is standardized. Hence, you have a full bay and you have a full bay. Trying to half bay does not work very well in the case for balance, and it makes even less sense in the case for the lore. Remember, the Imperial Navy as itself is a standardized military fleet that is designed to have one ship made in one sector be roughly equivalent to another ship made in another sector in regards to classes. You can make a lunar cruiser on one end of the galaxy, and it will have relatively similar characteristics to a lunar cruiser made on the entire other side of the galaxy. There's no, we're splitting the Lance Bay in half and slapping two macro cannons in there. No, we don't do that. The Imperial Navy is relatively standardized. Now, if you have a rogue trader fleet, which is technically an Imperial Navy fleet, rogue traders who don't adhere to the naval convention, who don't follow the rules, and are happy to modify their ships to the point where their local, Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest probably is having an aneurysm about tech heresy, well, maybe you can start playing around with that. Maybe there is a rogue trader micro empire far in the outskirts of the galaxy that happens to have a isolated and desperate Forge world willing to make concessions to their local lord, because that's the only way that they get further resources from deeper within the galaxy to make half bays or hybrid bays. Maybe that's an option. Maybe it's something to consider. But remember, ultimately, because the Navy is standardized and they adhere mostly to the Adeptus Mechanicus' demands, things do not get played around with very much in the Navy. And there is some tactical purpose to this. You want to know what your ships do when they enter into combat. You don't want to just kind of throw them, throw things willy-nilly at the enemy. And the Navy is not like the Imperial Guard. It's not like the Death Corps of Krieg. You're not charging into headline into battle. And this is why I'm actually very annoyed by a lot of how the Imperial Navy is written in lore. All of this ridiculous concept of we're charging into the enemy for close range combat, when that's not what the Imperial Navy is actually that good at. It's meant to maintain a aggressive phalanx. While it does close on the enemy, it bombards them constantly with torpedoes and nova cannons, only moving into close combat when the enemy has been bludgeoned into submission to finish them off, or if the enemy is fast enough to outmaneuver them. The Imperial Navy is not dumb. It never has been dumb. It can't be dumb. They don't have the room, they don't have the resources for brainlet commanders. So remember that every time you read something stupid in Black Library, it doesn't necessarily comport well to actual events that may or may not have occurred. All you have to do to be better than most of the commanders in Black Library is be brand new at the game and have never played BFG. Congratulations, you're better than they are. Now, when it comes to adjustments to actual things like special rules, remember that the Imperial Navy does have access to a lot of different options that are already standard with the Imperial Navy. There are plenty of options for increasing range, for removing column shifts, for specialized weapons to be replaced with other, one weapon to be swapped with another weapon, especially in the prow. So what you should do is, when you are making these options, if you decide to do so, make sure that they are a noticeable and relatively expensive upgrade. So, good example. Torpedo to Nova Cannon is a 20-point upgrade. That's a lot of points for a weapon. The upgrade to increase range on the Tyrant is, I think, 10 points. Hold on. We can find out. Gothic. Tyrant. Upgrade is 10 points to increase range. So, from 30 to 45 is 10 points on a Strength 6 battery. The upgrade for the Overlord for the column shift, let me just slide up here. Here we go, is 15 points. Well worth it, by the way. Now, another important upgrade, side grade, is that there are cases where there are a lot of ships that have side grades, if that makes any sense. So you can adjust range or firepower based upon a reduction or a zero-sum change in points that'll change the how the ship is used. So here's our Dominator. As you can see, you can change the weapons to a 45 centimeter range, firepower 6, for -5 points. Okay? Now, I've never met anyone that's done that because you're chopping your firepower in half, but it is a way to turn a 190-point Nova Cannon carrying ship into a 185 Nova Cannon carrying ship. You can make it even cheaper. So if your goal is to get that special weapon into the game, maybe give them an option to bring it in super cheap, but really hamstring the vessel. So play around with your new cruiser concepts. Make sure that you have a lot of ways to make them interesting. And, give your players options. A ship that has absolutely no way of modification, because the Tyrant can be modified, the Lunar can be modified. Guess what can't be modified? Here, the Gothic. This is a specialized ship. It is designed to do one thing. If you're going to make a ship with this kind of specialization, make sure it's good at that one thing, so people will take it despite the fact that there aren't any options for it. Okay? All right, now let's now move out of the Imperial Navy, because, again, we are looking at a situation where we have limited choice. And we're going to go into the other wonderful case of limited choice, chaos, as we skip over Space Marines because we want to. Now, chaos has a number of issues in regards to this area. Now, I know that Grand Cruiser counts as a cruiser. We're going to make your own Grand Cruiser in the next video, because Grand Cruisers are an entirely different creature. But it'll be fun, so wait until we get there. Now, we are talking about Chaos Cruisers. Chaos Cruisers very much have the same relative problem that Imperial Navy cruisers have, which is the combination of bays has kind of already been filled out. So you want double batteries. You have two ships for that, the Carnage and the Murder. You want slaughter bays. Well, you have the Slaughter. Now, there isn't a hybrid bay for the Slaughter yet, so there could be some room with that combination with other things. You have the Inferno, which is double bay and battery. You have the Carnage, obviously double bay. You have the Devastation, which is... They put a slaughter bay in here. I never agreed with that because it is a strength 2 lance. I think it should be the double lance bay. But the way it was originally shown was a slaughter bay, even if I disagree with it. Also, I disagree with the placement of the carrier bay in front. It should be behind. It looks better. Shame on GW for getting the wrong combo. And of course, you have the open double bay, which the Acheron has double. Now, I guess I'm going to have to take back what I said. There are a lot of combinations that are not used, but you do fall into the problem of, if you make something new, what is it interfering with, based less upon the actual status of the bay and more about the actual rules. So if you want a ship that has, on the broadsides, double lances and battery, well, you have it at the Inferno, it's already been made. If you want just all battery every day, you have the Murder and you have the Carnage. We've already gotten that. We've already done that. You want, now, the Slaughter Bay, you already have here's the thing. With the Slaughter Bay, it is meant to be one lance. This is why I really hate the way the artist depicted the Devastation, because it has two lances on the broadside. This is a single lance and a strength 4 battery hybrid. This is an actual true hybrid bay. And Chaos are the only ones that get it. Neener take that Imperial Navy. So if you wanted to instead have a ship with a single lance, a strength 4 bay, and then you go up here to the Murder Bay, which is, this is technically a strength 4 bay and a strength 6 bay at 45. You either double up on 6s, but the number is typically strength 4, strength 6. I think there is a strength 8 variant. I'd have to double check, but yeah. But it would be, if you would want a strength 10 weapons battery and 1 lance out the side, you theoretically could do that, but then you'd have to ask the question of, why would I ever take the Murder? Right? And it would be pretty expensive, too. We're talking probably like 180 points if you had that strength 10, 1 lance broadside, plus whatever you have in the prow. Now, Chaos prow weapons are very different than the Imperial Navy. They are either lances or they are weapons batteries. Typically, they're weapons batteries, usually strength 6. And that always fires front, left, right, with the exception of the Murder. We're accepting that. And it's usually, 30 centimeters, unless, of course, you are the Inferno, in which case yours have been extended out to 60. So there are no Chaos cruisers that have a front, left, right lance bay. That may be something, but it would be very expensive. But when you move into the, of course, here you go with the Carnage. It has that 60 centimeter front, left, right. But as you can see here is pretty much the official combo of weapons bays and strengths. You have a strength 4, you have a strength 6. The range can be variable, but really the maximum broadside out of the side of a Chaos Cruiser has been kind of pseudo-capped here at strength 10, and then you combine it with the prow weapons bay, you can get up to 16 on a Carnage, and that's the standard cruiser level. So the Carnage is very useful to give us a barometer of how much we can shove into a broadside of a standard cruiser. Now, when we move into... So, you can play around here, but recognize that you will have to increase costs if you so desire to make a ship that is more punchy than the Murder on a broadside, or a Carnage on a broadside. Because if you take that Slaughter Bay, which would only be 30 centimeters, because there's never been a case of that Slaughter Bay ever being particularly long range. I think even the Devastations is... Well, the Devastation doesn't even have the weapons batteries here. That's why I don't like this. This is a Slaughter Bay. That's supposed to have batteries on it. There's no port and starboard batteries. That's very annoying. So I'm not even... This is just... Imagine this is a double bay, okay? This is just a double bay, just like on the Inferno. So we're going to move away from that and spit upon it. But if you take a battery bay and a Slaughter Bay, okay, that would be either a strength 8 battery and 1 lance, and the battery could be between 45 and 60, at least half of the battery. The strength 4 would be between 45. The first strength 4 would be 30. The second strength 4 could be 45 to 60. Or you could take the 30 centimeter or 45 centimeter strength 6 and make that a strength 10. You have an equivalent battery strength to the Murder and a single lance out the side, which could be pretty hot, though it would be 45 and 30. You'd have that, you'd have a non, what's a good way to put it? A non-conforming ranges, which is not uncommon in Chaos. The real question then is, what are you putting in the prow? Now, that broadside is pretty potent. So we need something that is both effective but not overpowering in the prow of the murder. Or the ship, I would put probably a weapons battery, or I would put a much shorter range front, left, right lance, maybe a 30-centimeter lance. So strike 2 30-centimeter lance, a much shorter range but more lance-heavy, higher firepower cruiser. And that would probably cost you about 180 points. It would be expensive. It would be about the same cost as a Carnage or an Inferno. But it would hold a similar job, I would point out, to the Slaughter, because the Slaughter can get in at close range with a strength 14 weapons battery and 2 lances, which is much better than strength 10, 3 lances, 14, 2 lances. It's roughly equivalent, but you have significantly better range and a lot more flexibility out of the other ship. But they do kind of conflict with one another. And frankly, I would take the Slaughter over that any day of the week. But also, if you wanted my more proof of my explanation of the strength of the bay, you have 2 weapons batteries at 8. Well, that divided by 2, that's 4 and 4. And of course, the 2 lances, 1 and 1. So, when you are making a Chaos unique cruiser, remember that you can either try to make something that is good enough to actually fight on its own and compete actively, not step on the toes of another cruiser. There may be some room here if you really wanted to play around with it. You may have to play around with a couple of special rules. Maybe you want a carrier. Maybe you want to actually compete with like the where is the Devastation? Maybe you want to actually make this true ship and actually have a strength 4 weapons battery and 1 lance and a carrier. You may maybe extend the range of the prow weapons battery, make it a little bit more punchy on batteries, but then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, how is that competing now with the Hecate, which can have up to a strength 10 battery and those 2 dorsal lances? Why would I ever take an Hecate if that was the case? And the answer is you wouldn't. So there are options for slots, but there's a lot of toes to step on. But if you want to make this cruiser, you can simply, in your fleet list, remove the thing that it would be competing with and give the player only your new ship as an option. You are allowed to erase ships from the... you're allowed to erase ships from the original roster and replace them with your own, so long as they serve a relatively similar purpose. That way there's no footstepping. Now, I will say this. Before the addition of the Hecate, there was a lot of room in the heavy cruiser slot to do things. Now, not so much. The heavy cruisers are all basically ships taken from the cruiser slot, modified a little bit, and then given dorsal lances. The Acheron is actually one of 2 modified Devastations. It is, we have taken away your launch bay, and we've slapped in lances and added even more lances because lances are awesome, and extended the range. And this is, by the way, is my favorite heavy cruiser. The Hades is obvious. It's a murder cruiser with 2 more lances, right? Very clear. Now, the Hecate is another case of, well, we're just going to fill in a hole, and it's kind of tragic because it's not that good at its job, but it's sort of a Carnage, sort of a murder, and sort of it's far closer to a Carnage, really. It's like a modified Carnage heavy cruiser, just one of its bays given over to launch bays. And of course there is the Styx, which is just doubling down on the Devastation. Now, is there room for a Slaughter battlecruiser? Maybe. That's a mean battlecruiser, but it's kind of interfering with the Hades and the Acheron. So if I were to make a Slaughter battlecruiser, maybe extend all of its ranges to 45, give it 2 dorsal lances, I would have to take out either the Hades or the Acheron, or potentially both, because it will be interfering with those ships. In fact, a Slaughter heavy cruiser would basically invalidate the Acheron. Even if I have super short range weapons, there'd be no reason to take this, because I would have the same lance broadside, but I would have that strength 14 weapons battery on top of it. So to do so, I would, if I were to make this theoretical heavy cruiser, it would completely, and I would completely remove the Hades, I would completely remove the Acheron. The only thing would be this Slaughter class. Now, what about a Carnage? What about a true Carnage battle cruiser? Again, what ships am I invalidating with this? Well, that would be the Hecate and the Hades. I would take them out and replace it with this. It's the only thing you get. You want to play with this ship, you got to pay for it. Okay? Now, as you are making these ships, also remember your point costs. Chaos ships tend to be cheaper than Imperial Navy ships. And when it comes to making their armor is always going to be 5 up. There's no such thing as a 6 up armor Chaos vessel unless you really want to dig deep and find the Chaos the Chaos Space Marine Strike Cruiser. Or you take a stolen Imperial Navy vessel. So, like the Imperial Navy, most of the cruiser class slots are kind of filled up. There isn't a lot of room to maneuver without stepping on somebody else's toes and purpose, but if you remove a ship that it steps on the toes of, you can actually start building a really creative fleet. Recognize that most of the Chaos fleets just have everything. There's no restrictions. Making a restrictive Chaos list is absolutely viable, and I'm doing it myself. So, moving out of Chaos, we're going to actually kind of move into Space Marines. And there's a reason why we have to talk about Space Marines specifically. And that's because there is not a lot of room for Space Marines to have fun, unique, and interesting stuff. Same with Adeptus Mechanicus. There is thematic and there is both thematic and lore reasons why Space Marines only get what they get, and that's all they get, and no, you cannot have more. Not only do you have the option of bringing in Venerable Battle Barges, which opens up Chaos, basically it opens up virtually every other Imperial fleet on the high-end power scale for you to do whatever you want with, so you really don't need more ships. But also, according to the lore, battle barges, strike cruisers are given to them because that's all they're allowed to have. They don't have a lot of room to get specialized things, and they're all standardized. Why? To keep them under control. A strike cruiser is a very powerful ship, but it is a destroyable ship. It is something that the Imperial Navy, if it has to, is more than capable of blowing out of the sky fast enough to prevent it from boarding their ship in a perfect world. And the reason for this is called the Horus Heresy. Strike cruisers and battle barges are glorified troop transports. Now, what you could do if you wanted to make some new Space Marine ships is you could play around if you have the right chapter. Let's say you wanted to make an Iron Hands fleet or an Iron Warriors fleet, because these are definitely the kind of things that they would cheerfully use. Play around with, the factions that are more than willing to, go behind the AdMech's back and do their own technological tinkering. But don't make it extreme. Remember that these fleets are closely monitored by the rest of the Imperium. Even the Space Wolves, who are notorious for stealing stuff, have eyes on them pretty regularly, okay? They don't have the luxury of, doing wild stuff beyond the ships they've already stolen. Now, there are minor exceptions, and if you are a filthy plebeian, you can go into the Badab War book and see that there are other kinds of strike cruiser, and that is something you could play around with. Maybe a particularly old and venerable chapter has some of the more esoteric strike cruisers from before the Horus Heresy or during the Great Crusade, but don't make them extreme. One of the elements of a Space Marine fleet is that it does not have access to actual cruisers, actual battle cruisers. This is a limitation of the fleet. Don't play around with it. If you are pushing yourself to make one of these, have it be a specialized vessel. Maybe it's designed to have not better firepower, but be better at boarding and boarding alone, so you pull back on its already weakened firepower even further, but you give it 2 more hits. You give it maybe an advantage in boarding. Maybe you make up special rules for it to make it easier for it to board, or make it better at planetary assaults. But remember, we are very heavily limited in the 41st millennium in what Space Marines can take. Now, you can play around with prow armaments. Maybe you can give it new and interesting special weapons. Maybe a chapter still has Volkite weaponry in space. Maybe they have grav weaponry. But in that regard, make sure that you keep its power level roughly equivalent to a Strength 6 torpedo or a Strength 5 bombardment cannon. Okay? You can go up and down in the power scaling with, the addition of points. Maybe you have to pay points to get this specialized weapon. But one critical thing, do not give them lances. If you give them lances, you invalidate them. This option down here at the bottom may replace its prow bombardment cannon with a strength 1, range 30 for 20 points. That is a terrible upgrade. Do you want to know why that's a terrible upgrade? We made it terrible deliberately because the lance weaponry of the Space Marines was confiscated. It was confiscated at the end of the heresy because the Imperial Navy is designed to have them to kill Space Marine ships. The most powerful weapons of the Imperium, the lance, which really is what it is consigned to the Navy to keep Space Marines under control. This represents the very few strike cruisers that had this modification not done. And that's why it's so expensive, because it is rare. Okay. So bear all of that in mind. Now, there are areas that you potentially could play around with a little bit more, like Venerable Battle Barges. The Venerable Battle Barge really kind of is all bets off. You can do a lot of stuff, all you really want with them, okay? But their Venerable Battle Barges always are character ships. You can never take more than one. So a good template for that is, as much as I hate to admit it, is the Sedito Apri. Have a look at this battle barge. It is wild, with an incredible amount of firepower. Just remember, bombardment cannons are 30 centimeters only. No 45 centimeters in this. Bombardment cannons are a short-range weapon. They're meant for planetary bombardment. Now, if you wanted to take the battle barge template and add in lances, a much heavier battery, longer range battery. Maybe you keep stats but increase its shields or increase its turrets for a points premium. Maybe you want to take a battleship from another area and make it into a Venerable Battle Barge. You have pretty much free reign so long as it is an Imperial design and follows the standard conventions of battle cruiser, grand cruiser, battleship. Just make sure you recognize you have to pay the 35 additional points when you are calculating your points, because it's going to be expensive one way or another. Now, what about Adeptus Mechanicus? Now, Adeptus Mechanicus has a problem. They don't have battle cruisers. They already have all of the standard cruisers of the Imperium, and they kind of battle cruiserify them, okay? So there isn't, again, a lot of room. They all have, effectively, the same ships. Okay, they have the light cruisers with the exception of the Dauntless because they prefer the Endeavor family. But this is all you get. Where can we move around with the AdMech? Well, let's think outside of the box. The AdMech are the actual technologically advanced group. We can make specialized ships that do specialized things. Maybe you want to have a fleet support censorship that improves your leadership. It'd be expensive. It would be like 150 points. That basically boosts the leadership of your fleet, which is well needed for the AdMech. That'd be a great idea. Maybe you would want a repair ship. Maybe a standard cruiser, almost no firepower, but it can repair critical damage on nearby ships, or maybe even recover hull points. There's a lot of places you can go with a lot of the techno magic of the AdMech. Just recognize that anything you make is going to lose its firepower. Okay? Now, you can also play around with the specialized weapons in the prow. AdMech have dumb stuff. They have neutron weapons. They have black hole weapons. They have all sorts of crazy stuff. So be creative with your really big special weapons. Also, maybe you have a specialized class of AdMech ships that have more ready access to specialized torpedoes. These are something to consider. Okay? Now, in the escort domain, you have access to all of the Imperial escorts, so there's really no room to play around there. I mean, if you make a specific Forge Worlds specific fleet, right? You may create a unique escort. You may add things in or take things out. Now, in battleships, this is another very fun thing to consider. Obviously, we have the example of the Omniscience Victory, but the Omniscience Victory is just one example of many Arc Mechanicums, and that's really kind of what these other battleships are meant to represent. These are other Arc Mechanicums, but you can make your own. Maybe somewhere there is an Apocalypse equivalent of the Omniscience Victory. Maybe there is a specialized Apocalypse that is used by a Forge World that has special rules. You would have to go in there and play with it. It would probably completely invalidate the Retribution and the Omniscience Victory. Neither of those ships could be taken, but it would be the only option. I would actually, if I had a AdMech Apocalypse, I would negate the Retribution, the Emperor, and the Omniscience Victory. You would have it and the Oberon, and that's it. Those are your only choices. You can only take one of this specialized ship, just as an example. It would also be expensive. It would probably be close to 430 points because it is ridiculous. Because it's obviously going to have access to a lot of the special rules that the AdMech already have. So it's going to be punchy and mean, and that's a good thing. So as we're moving out of the human factions, I'm not going to go into Rogue Trader here. That really kind of deserves its own video. But we're gonna move on and finally kind of move into the domain of the Orc, as if I can find them. Okay, moving into the Orcs, we have I'm a little hesitant to talk about Orcs because I'm making an entirely new Orc fleet. But Orcs work in actually very similar ways to the Imperium and to Chaos. They have specific port and starboard and prow bays. It's a little different, but they have guns, heavy guns, and carriers. And a carrier base for the side. All of them have those three combinations. And then you have specialized weapons in the prow. You always have a prow gun, and you always have heavy guns. Now, the heavy guns can be swapped for torpedoes. One of the battleships swaps that out. And the battle cruiser swaps that out. But unlike the Imperium and unlike the unlike Chaos and all of the other factions there, okay, the thing that we have to realize is Orcs, despite the fact that they have a huge number of ships, are actually very underrepresented in the cruiser area. Now, when the 2010 FAQ happened, they added a couple, like they added in, what was it? Zhukov's Claw Assault Cruiser. They had it in a lot of stuff. Oh, there's one more thing about Space Marines I forgot. Space Marines change the rules for prow armament. They have carriers in the prow, which is something that nobody else in the Imperium of Man has. Which is the modifiable one of the modifiable weapon slots. So if you make something specialized, remember that they tend to have carrier bays in the prow and not in the port and starboard. But back to Orcs. Zhukov's Claw Assault Cruiser. This is technically a character ship, but it's also technically it's also technically a terror ship, and a specialized ship, but it is a good example of how you can play with Orcs, because Orcs have no standardization. You have a cheap, simple cruiser, and you have the more expensive carrier. You can play around with this a lot. Now, I'm not going to go into detail too much about my idea, but I can foresee maybe another kill cruiser variant, which is just all heavy guns. No guns whatsoever, just heavy guns. But all of those heavy guns, port, starboard, prow, whatever, can be swapped out with torpedoes as well. Imagine the ridiculousness of that ship. Now, as you do more ridiculous things, you have to do more ridiculous things in balance. If I have a Orc cruiser that has all torpedoes, that thing is going to be so explosive that it might as well just be a bomb. So I would definitely make rules that would make sure that that thing explodes if it ever dies. But imagine that, you know, D6 plus 2 torpedoes, port. D6 plus 2 torpedoes, starboard. D6 plus 4 torpedoes at the prow. It's just nothing but torpedoes. Torpedoes all day, every day. You have a lot of room. Your imagination, the orcs let you really be a mech boy. Let your imagination run wild. Just make sure that it properly balances itself and does not, quote unquote, compete with a terror ship or a kill cruiser. Which is not hard. A kill cruiser is very generic. The terror ship is very generic. There's a lot of places you can go outside of that. So play around a little bit. And also, very similarly, moving into the battle cruiser area, if I can find the battle cruiser, there's only one of them. Okay? Oh, hold on. I'm just going to cheat a little bit here for you. This cheating. Here we go. It's kind of sad there was never... There's a reason why there's no image for the hammer. It's because you're expected to make it yourself. But the Hammer class battle cruiser follows a lot of the conventions of the battleships, which is they have 2 bays on the port, 2 bays on the starboard, and then the dorsal bay, and then your prow, something special. Okay? There is only one battle cruiser. That means you can go wild. Maybe you can have a standard battle cruiser just with more heavy, with like a strength 8 heavy gun in the front. There is lots of room for you to play with. Go wild. Add wild things. These are orcs. Be wild with orcs. But remember that you have a certain standard. You have 2 ports on the two bays on the port, 2 bays on the starboard, a prow gun, and something special. And then if it's in the battle cruiser, dorsal launch bays. That is standard for orcs. And that dorsal launch bay goes across all of the orc battleships as well. Now, when you are making yourself an orc battleship, recognize that battleships in the orc meta are all character ships, which means your orc battleship, however you make it, must be a character ship. All right? So give it some fun lore. Now, let's look at the battleships to see what you get. What you're finding, just like the battle cruiser, 2 port, 2 starboard, heavy guns, gun and standard guns, dorsal launch bay, always D3 plus 1, and then something special in the prow, and then the guns. In the case of the Cruel Boy, it's a strength 6 bombardment cannon. And by the way, that's really good. I don't have to reload that stupid thing. And of course you have things to upgrade the orc ship if you want it to be faster or slower, better or worse. Remember that when you're making a battleship... Oh, I'm into battleships. I shouldn't even be talking about this. Never mind. We'll talk about orc battleships. But it does follow the convention because orcs are kind of restrictive with their current cruiser slot. So battle cruiser and cruiser are very open. Go wild. Find ways to make them funny. Okay? Because remember, orcs are meant to be a joke. They're absolutely meant to be a joke, so be silly with it. Maybe you have a cruiser that's designed to board, right? Maybe then you could actually have a standard or cruiser that you can take that's not in the clans list that has heavy claws. That would be awesome. That would be hilarious. It would take up a port in a starboard bay, but okay, who cares? I want to grab my enemy. Maybe you want to actually give it like a specialized jaw that actually does damage or helps it into boarding. These are all these sorts of things that can make a ship more orky. Okay? In regards to points, orc ships tend to be less expensive. And let's say if you're focusing on boarding, it's going to be even cheaper because you're taking guns away. And boarding is not always easy for an orc ship. But always remember, orcs kind of have a hamstring. There's always a thing that makes the ship a little less good than it should be. Like, for example, the kill cruiser. It has a lot of good firepower, but it's a pain to get it close because it's so slow. Same with the terror ship. It's pretty slow for a ship of its size. So, go hog wild, guys. Orcs are meant to be played with, and played with actively for fun. Now, moving into the Eldar, we have another case of not a whole lot in the cruiser slot. Okay, we have the Eclipse, and we have the Eclipse, and we have the Shadow, and that's it. That's all you got. Now, there have been in other fan-made content, specifically BFG France, and I think in XR, you have other options for the cruiser slot where they basically are mixing and matching the weapons. You either have batteries and carrier, or pulsar lances and torpedo. And unfortunately, there really isn't a lot of reason to do that, because if you start mixing and matching, you begin homogenizing the Eldar. And when you homogenize the Eldar, they get fucking boring. The Eldar are meant to be highly specialized. They're meant to have these very widely disparate ships. So I would actually recommend, instead of making new cruisers, which they really don't need, is to move into the slot that they don't have, which is battle cruiser. There are no Eldar Corsair battle cruisers. So imagine instead you have a carrier equivalent. Maybe it has the Strength 14 weapons battery, a stronger one than the Eclipse, and launch capacity. And maybe some other special rules that make it a more expensive but worthy option instead of the Eclipse. So, or maybe you can find a gimmick that works really well in a battle cruiser slot that would make an otherwise pretty normal ship really amazing. So, the Corsairs could use a battle cruiser if somebody could figure out good rules for it. It would be a competitor for the Voidstalker, which, to be blunt, the Corsairs kind of need, because the hop from the Eclipse all the way up to the Voidstalker is a huge one. Now, I've seen people make grand cruisers for the Corsairs. I've always imagined it more as something that really needs to be a battle cruiser. You know, it still has 6 hits, but it has a lot more firepower in the cruiser area. Maybe you can take one for every 2 cruisers. You could potentially have like a light cruiser, battle cruiser, offset fleet, which could be really, really fun. But things to remember when you're building them, you only have 2 bays to play with. You have keel and you have prow, okay? Even over here on our battleship, you have keel and prow. That's all you get, all right? So only work within the domain of keel and prow. If you add a dorsal, if you add a port and starboard, they lay outside of the Eldar critical hits table. You can do it, but recognize that those weapons are forever protected, which means your points costs are going to go up as a result, okay? Also, all firepower with the exception of the battleship and maybe a battle cruiser. That could potentially be a battle cruiser worthy thing. All of them fire front, unless you're the battleship, but you know, maybe a battle cruiser would have access to these kinds of weapons. That may be what makes it a battle cruiser. Okay? Play around with these rules. There's a lot of room left in the domain of the Eldar. Everything basically from light cruiser up is open for you to play with. Now, I'm not going to make the accident of going into battleships. Different video, I promise. Now, we're going to go directly into the course. We're going to actually, it's kind of an anecdote for the Craft World Eldar. There has been a lot of fan-made rules for Craft Worlders, specifically to add battleships. In regards to the cruiser zone, it's a lot harder to make a fan-made cruiser because the Craft Worlders have their ships function as build-a-ships. You make anything you want based on your options. So the Wraith ship and the Dragon ship, they're build-a-ships. They're, you know, you have a battle cruiser and you have a standard cruiser. Now, if you wanted to play around with this, you'd have to kind of either make anything above this that goes into Grand Cruiser territory, which really is what the Flame of Assyrian is. That's a different video. But you could potentially make new weapons to give you options for. Just make sure the weapons are balanced or appropriate. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what I'm working on, because I am making a Craft World Eldar fleet with new weapons. But this is pretty restrictive, and also make abundantly sure that that what you are making is viable for use. Okay, make it so it could actually compete with the weapons battery and the pulsar lances. Make sure it is good enough. Okay, make sure that it could actually be like, it would be valuable to have batteries, pulsars, and this new weapon. Okay. So, but ultimately, because they're build-a-ships, there's not a lot of room. This also applies to the Dark Eldar. You have one cruiser type. Now, there have been a lot of Dark Eldar cruiser expansion. There's the Succubus. There's just a long list of Dark Eldar cruiser options. There's a Grand Cruiser out there. I could see a battle cruiser equivalent of the Torture that has potentially, maybe again, that front, left, right firepower, or maybe it specializes, it's all impalers, or it functions entirely off of ordnance, or it is all firepower, no ordnance whatsoever. You know, that for the Dark Eldar, getting that specialization is actually very important, because their generalist nature hamstrings them. It's actually what keeps them from being a powerful long-term combatant on the table. They're really good in like the first couple of rounds, and then they quickly start to falter, which is very Dark Eldar. But we have room in this fleet in the cruiser slot for both light cruisers and for battle cruisers. What would be a battle cruiser? It would have basically the same stats as a standard cruiser. It would just have different weapon choices. It may have fixed weapon choices. It may be, again, have access to unique weapons. The Dark Eldar weaponry list has expanded. Maybe it's a dedicated boarding ship. Maybe it has special rules specifically for slave taking. There's a lot of room here. Just recognize that it will be more expensive. The more things you give to it, the more expensive it would be. I would price such a ship in that domain to be probably you're looking at 250 points plus. Okay? Now, if you go higher into Grand Cruiser, which technically we can't do, wrong video, you're looking at around 300 points. But a battle cruiser definitely is in this domain and definitely could be made. And would be a lot of fun, too, for the Dark Eldar player. We've already done Orcs, and I already blew the video on that one, so shame on me, slap me in the hand. Again, also remember, battle cruisers can be character ships, too. Just think about that. Okay, Necrons. Necron cruiser construction is based effectively on the Scythe. Now, we've already talked about the Shroud and the light cruiser area. The Scythe is a perfect generalist ship. It does everything you really need it to do in regards to beating the snot out of your enemy. And it's really, really good at it. So if you're going to make a specialist cruiser, recognizing full well that the Scythe is a battle cruiser equivalent. Its points and its firepower are all battle cruiser equivalent. So you could make a lighter Scythe. It still has 8 hits, but it is cheaper, maybe closer to 200 points with significantly less firepower. Maybe it has a strength 12 lightning arc, but no particle whips. Maybe you take the portal out. Maybe you're going to have to kind of keep the Star Pulse generator, or maybe you could take it out. It's all about specialization in regards to the standardized Necron ship, if you want to give it a non-battle cruiser option. It'll have the same speed, same turn, same armor, same save. Maybe you give it 2 turrets, maybe make it a little bit weaker in that regard. But the point zone that you're aiming for a standard Necron cruiser would be around 200 points. So maybe a lightning arc, again, of maybe 12, maybe only a single particle whip, maybe 2 particle whips at 45, maybe drop the portal to 1 and take away the Star Pulse generator, make that the special battle cruiser thing. But that would be a good option. You could also, be variable. You can give it special rules. You can give it special weapons. You may actually give it an option. Maybe you can give one with a terror field, but take away the Star Pulse generator and 2 of the particle whips. All of these things are available to you because there's only one standard or battle cruiser for the Necrons. You have room to play. Just recognize that Necron ships are expensive, and they are meant to be better than their equivalent in every other slot because of their relative weaknesses. Now, moving out of that into Tyranids, there's actually a lot of room to play here with Tyranids, because Tyranids only have one cruiser. It's a generalist cruiser. You're meant to build the ship, if that makes any sense. Yeah, you can build basically the ship. Because it's generalist, you can play in the domain of specialist. If you go and look at Book of the Void 2, they really delve deep into this. You can make a Kraken equivalent which has really, really good armor in a cruiser slot and actually make cruisers more intimidating. So that's really a matter of it gets a special rule or a special gimmick, and you take away weapons options. Okay? Maybe it has 8 hits, really good armor, giant claws, and nothing else. It's like a baby hive ship. It's maturing still, but it's still hungry for food. But the Tyranid situation is very open in cruisers. You could create potentially narwhals. I think narwhals are supposed to be escorts, actually, but you can create maybe ships that actually have developed their synapse, right? Maybe it's not as long range, but it gives you a little more coverage from your hive ships. So as you move into the specialization domain for Tyranids, you have a lot more choices in the cruiser domain by restricting their options. Okay? And that's the same for any build-a-ship. You restrict their options, you expand upon their capacities for specific tactical roles. So, out of Tyranids and into Tau. Now, the 2 Tau options, we find ourselves really having the same situation when it comes to our ships. Now, the Tau have technically 2 standard cruisers. Now, the Hero is technically a battle cruiser because of its firepower loadout. They have it priced as a lunar. It is what it is. It is technically a little bit better than the lunar, unless, of course, the lunar owner is smart enough to actually get close, in which case the lunar is vastly superior at close ranges. But this is the only old-school ship in the true cruiser domain that the Tau have. Now, there are 2 versions of it. There is the Ion and the battery version, which kind of covers your slots. And like Imperial ships, this thing has 2 bays on the side. You have the carrier bay and the weapon bay, and then your prow bay. All heroes have carrier bays, which means there is an open place for a hero variant with no carrier bays. Maybe you can make it really, really mean with weapons batteries, or give it even more ion cannons. But you would be kind of violating this convention here. Now, I could definitely see a unique fleet for Farside enclaves, which would absolutely use these ships almost to an exclusion because they don't have the resources of the Tau Empire. They would be using a lot of these old ships, but they would heavily modify them, pulling out these launch bays maybe and slapping in even more firepower. So, I don't know, potentially maybe more port and starboard ion cannons, giving up to 8 firepower. It'd be a great battle cruiser equivalent to these ships. Or maybe 8 even more weapons batteries. Just make it more and more powerful. Now, I could also see it only being strength 1, reducing that power creep by a little bit, because obviously these weapons cost more power than a launch bay. Or you could give it better gravitic launchers, or you could take the gravitic launchers out and add in launch bays. Make it a more appropriate carrier. I could absolutely see a more specialized, for a Farside Enclave fleet, a specialized hero that has no gravitic launchers and its carriers in the prow, and then launch bays in its prow, and then more firepower on its port and starboard bays. That would be a lot of fun. And then you have the opposite of that, a very heavily armed gravitic launcher option as well, but relying entirely on the explorers for their launch capacity. So, in regards to new classes, there's not a lot of room. The hero really straddles that battlecruiser line, and because technically these ships aren't being made anymore, there's no real room for explanations of new development, right? The lore isn't really friendly to that. But again, if you're playing Farside Enclaves, they have to do what they need to do. You can play around a little bit with this design. Making a new design would be kind of difficult because it has to serve a purpose outside of the hero and the merchant and the explorer, and the Tau are very good at that kind of specialization. So remember, if you remove one ship, you have room to fill it with another. So let's say the Farside Enclave fleet doesn't have explorers, because even those ships are hard for them to get access to. They could potentially just modify a hero and put nothing but carrier bays in it. Maybe give it launch capacity 6 and a little bit more firepower, and eliminate the explorer altogether. But it's going to be point for point more expensive because it's going to be a more defensible ship. Just something to consider. But something like that, your points range here is going to be, again, from about 180 up to maybe around 210 points. So bear that in mind. But with that, we are kind of done with... Oh, right. Not done with Tau, because we have to talk about the Protector. Now, the Protector has 2 options, right? We have the Tolku and we have the Vjorla. Okay? The differences being the strength and the firepower of the weapons batteries. Because of the way this fleet works, these 2 options are not necessarily all-encompassing, but they're very good at kind of smearing their purposes out, right? You can get either a better weapons battery or you can get a longer range weapons battery. And always you have either a short-range ion or a long-range ion. You have the Prowl launch base, you have the Prowl gravitic launcher, but these are very generalist builds. Again, opening ourselves up to more specialized builds. I could foresee a more fleet support version of the Protector, maybe eliminating this launch bay, adding in some kind of fleet defense turret, or take out the launch bay and add in a stronger gravitic launcher, maybe take that up to strength 7. Okay? Ways to play around with my options here, but you're always going to kind of be working off of the old Tolku option, or you can play it off of this one. There's no difference in points between the 2 ships. But if you're going to modify guns specifically through the actual guns. Don't take away the launch bay to increase your firepower, because we have to work with what the mini gives us. But if you want to modify your ordnance, you can play around with that between the 2. I could absolutely see them just taking out that launch bay and adding in more gravitic launchers. I could absolutely see them just taking out these ion cannons and replacing them with more rail guns. Because they have that convention in the hero. They take out the ions and give them a bunch of rail guns. Why not give them that option? Now, would you want to take out the rail guns and give them the option for even more ions? Maybe. I don't know if we want to necessarily give them that many lances. So play around with it. You may have to eliminate configurations. Like, again, if this is a Farside Enclave ship, you're going to have whole new configurations, if that makes any sense. You'll probably still have the Vjorla configuration, because the Farside Enclaves has a lot of love for their old Sept world. Because that's where Farsight came from. So you probably would have the Vjorla configuration, you'd have the Vjorlos configuration, and you may have an entirely third configuration based off of another Tau world, maybe the Earthcast world, that has wonky technology rules. That could be a lot of fun. These configuration swaps would be very interesting. And that applies, of course, to the Emissary as well. So that'd actually be a really fun fleet. Maybe I should make a Farside Enclaves fleet that swaps around the configurations of the ships. That could be really cool. I'm going to add that to my list. So we've already done light cruisers. So that's, I think, pretty much it before we move into the really esoteric stuff like wolf packs and the allies of the Tau and generalized... Oh, I guess we could talk about the Demiurge. The Demiurge need help because they have 2 cruiser options and they're both wildly expensive. The Bastion is a battle cruiser. The Citadel is a standard cruiser. They're very expensive for what you get. I don't have enough experience playing them to really consider what they need as a series of options, but I would say that the Bastion is a good all-rounder vessel with very good firepower and very good launch bays. I could absolutely see this launch bay being swapped out with a stronger torpedo salvo, because the real special weapon of the Demiurge is their all-round firing torpedoes. It's a very powerful weapon. Also over here, the Citadel, which is your standard cruiser, which I hate because this thing really should have 8 hits. It's the same model as the Bastion. This thing should have 8 hits. I could see a in-between of the Citadel and the Bastion, which has less firepower, but more of a focus on torpedoes. So let's talk about this fleet more down in the description down below. There are specialized rules that I did help create in Book of the Void 2 to expand upon the this fleet, that made it a little more complete. It has escorts, it has a specialized repair cruiser, but when it comes to an actual combat cruiser, there is a lot of room. I just don't have the experience to really come up with something definitive, because this is such a hard fleet to collect. I have one, I just have almost never played with it. It's hard to build because these ships before the era of 3D printing, were incredibly difficult to collect. They're all Forge World, and when Forge World stopped making them, we stopped having the ability to use them. So, anyway, I hope this answers a lot of questions. If you have any questions at all, please, down in the comments below, ask me your questions. I'm happy to expound upon my ideas, and if you have good ideas, let me know. I want to help you make your fleets. I'm already working with 2 other guys for 2 whole new sectors in Segmentum Pacificus. We're going to have a really, really cool time in the Caracas sector and the Farillo sector, working alongside the lore of my own Dropnir sector. It's going to be a lot of fun. There's a lot more fan content in the works, everybody. Rest assured, and best of all, there will be ships. So, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all again in the next video. Bye-bye.